Tony Stewart did not hold back. When the rest of the NASCAR world was posting tributes, sharing memories, and softening their words out of respect, Stewart walked up to a microphone ahead of the NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals at Bristol Dragway and said exactly what was on his mind. Not a eulogy, not a warm remembrance. A full-on blast at the NASCAR community, fans, media, and everyone in between for the way they treated Kyle Busch while he was alive, and the way they started talking about him only after he was gone. Kyle Busch died on the 21st of May 2026. He was 41 years old. The cause was severe pneumonia that progressed into sepsis. What made it even harder to process was the timeline. 6 days before his death, he was standing in Victory Lane at Dover Motor Speedway, celebrating his 234th career win in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He had been scheduled to run the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway that same weekend he died. Instead, the racing world woke up to the news that one of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport was gone. The details that emerged in the days following made it even more difficult to understand. A death certificate obtained by The Athletic and the Charlotte Observer revealed that Busch had been dealing with bacterial pneumonia for days to weeks before his death. The sepsis itself lasted only 1 day. That 1 day led to disseminated intravascular coagulation abnormal clotting throughout the blood vessels, which then caused hemorrhagic shock. He had reportedly told his team during a race at Watkins Glen that he wasn't feeling well and asked for a shot from a doctor after the race. The broadcast described it as a sinus infection. He pushed through it. He won at Dover the following week, and then 6 days later, he was gone. He went unresponsive in a Chevrolet racing simulator in Concord, North Carolina on a Wednesday afternoon. A 911 call captured the moment a caller described him lying on the bathroom floor, coughing up blood, feeling like he was going to pass out. He was transported to Atrium Health Carolina's medical center in Charlotte. Early the next morning, his family released the statement confirming he had not survived. Kyle Busch is survived by his wife Samantha, his son Brexton, who had just turned 11, his daughter Lennox, who is 4, his brother Kurt, and his parents Tom and Gay. The tributes came immediately and from everywhere. Brad Keselowski called it an absolute shock. Denny Hamlin, who had been Busch's teammate for years at Joe Gibbs Racing, wrote on social media that he absolutely cannot comprehend this news. Ryan Blaney described Busch as someone who was always there and always talked about, adding that his personality and competitiveness made him a larger-than-life person in racing. Dale Earnhardt Jr. took to social media, acknowledging the complicated history between them, but making clear how much their relationship had meant. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell addressed the crowd at Charlotte Motor Speedway before the Coca-Cola 600 and delivered a line that cut through everything. Kyle Busch is NASCAR. He was one of a kind. There will never be another. Joe Gibbs Racing released a statement calling Busch a fierce competitor, an incredible teammate, and far more importantly, a devoted husband, father, and son. Richard Childress Racing, the team Busch had been driving for since 2023, announced they were retiring the number 8, his number, until his son Brexton was old enough to go NASCAR racing himself. Every car in the field for the Coca-Cola 600 carried a small black number 8 decal as a tribute. Tony Stewart also paid tribute quietly, at first. He was photographed wearing a hat with Busch's number 8 on it at the Potomac Nationals at Maryland International Raceway. No statement, no press. Just a hat. But that silence did not last long. When Stewart finally spoke, it was not the tribute anyone expected. He was asked ahead of the NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals how Kyle Busch should be remembered. And instead of answering that question, he redirected it entirely. I guess the biggest thing in this tragedy that's happened that pisses me off the most is that now everybody wants to talk about how he was as a person, Stewart said. Outside of that, all they wanted to do is judge what they saw on TV. It's frustrating. That's the way every one of us are judged, by what they see on TV, and then once you die, they want to talk about how good a person you were. That's the part that pisses me off the most about it right now. He was not finished. Should have given him a chance to learn him as a person before they judged him in the first place, he continued. So right now, I don't care about educating everybody about how Kyle Busch was. I know who Kyle Busch was. The fact that they all want to learn now, they're the expletives for not taking the time to learn him and accept him for who he was back then. You want to wait until a guy dies and then care about who he was as a person? That's the part that pisses me off about everybody. There was no softening of that message, no diplomatic framing. Stewart said what he said, and he meant every word of it. For Stewart to deliver that kind of statement, it required credibility that most people standing on the outside of that garage simply do not have. He and Busch were not always close. They were both fiery, both proud, both capable of saying the wrong thing at the right time to create maximum friction. They had real moments of conflict on the track. Busch wrecked Stewart at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in 2006. Stewart turned Busch into the wall on the final lap at Daytona in 2009. These were not minor incidents. These were defining rivalry moments. But in 2008, Busch joined Stewart as a teammate at Joe Gibbs Racing, and that changed the relationship. Stewart saw something different up close, away from the cameras, away from the controversy, away from the version of Kyle Busch that made headlines. In his written tribute following Busch's death, Stewart was direct about what that experience revealed. Kyle Busch was a fierce competitor. He was strong-willed, confident, not only in his ability behind the wheel, but in his opinions. He held his own and didn't mince words. Early on, we didn't always see eye to eye, but in 2008, he became my teammate at Joe Gibbs Racing, and he was a great teammate. He pushed me to be better, and we always had respect for one another. It was easy to see that Kyle was going to be a future champion. He added, whether it was to see him win or to see someone beat him, you watched. Even the haters will miss Kyle. They'll learn in the coming weeks who he was as a person, a husband, and a father. That last sentence is the exact thing Stewart was furious about. People were learning who Kyle Busch was as a person. They were just doing it 3 weeks too late. Stewart himself lived the same narrative that Busch lived. He earned the nickname Smoke. He was the hothead, the guy with the temper, the guy who could go from charming to explosive in seconds. He had his own controversies, his own angry radio clips, his own moments where he became a character rather than a person in the public eye. He knows exactly what it feels like to be reduced to the worst moments that make television. The difference is, Stewart is still alive to talk about it. The backlash to Stewart's comments came quickly. Outkick described the rant as among the more tone-deaf they had heard, arguing that fans can only judge athletes by what they see on television. That is the nature of being a public figure. The outlet pointed out something worth acknowledging. Busch had actually become genuinely beloved by fans in the final years of his career at RCR. He had started on the pole for the 2026 Daytona 500, and the cheers were real. He was no longer just the villain. Fan reactions were divided. Some agreed with Stewart entirely. Others pushed back hard. He should apologize, one fan said. Another wrote, Tony, all of us common people didn't have an opportunity to know him like all you privileged people and competitors got to know him. Getting to see you on TV is what we get to see. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. A third offered a sharper critique of Stewart's position. He has a point. But the problem is his friends weren't telling anyone how great he was while he was alive. That last comment carries real weight. If Stewart and others inside the garage knew who Kyle Busch truly was, the teammate, the mentor, the father, why wasn't that version of the story being told while he was still racing every Sunday? The story of who Kyle Busch actually was, beyond the TV character, is not difficult to find once you start looking. He won 234 races across NASCAR's top 3 national series, more than any driver in the history of the sport. He won 63 Cup Series races, placing him 9th all-time. He claimed 2 Cup championships in 2015 and 2019. He ran Kyle Busch Motorsports in the Truck Series for over a decade, winning 100 races and developing future Cup stars, including Christopher Bell and Eric Jones. He was, by any honest measure, a generational talent. Ryan Blaney put it plainly, he was true to who he was, and that never changed. Austin Dillon, his RCR teammate who had grown up watching Busch as a fan before competing against him and eventually alongside him, wrote one of the most detailed tributes of anyone in the garage. He called Busch his favorite teammate and driver of all time, and described watching Busch battle through a difficult stretch at RCR with the same intensity he had always brought working the simulator for hours, grinding, refusing to lower his standard even when the results weren't coming. At Charlotte Motor Speedway that weekend, fans showed up, carrying the weight of it. One woman had driven from New Jersey to be around people who loved what she loved. She had a photo on her phone taken in Victory Lane at Dover 2 Fridays before his death of her and Kyle Busch smiling together after his 234th win. Fans in the campground passed stories around like shared currency stories that made them laugh and cry at the same time, because that is what Kyle Busch always produced. Stewart's anger was never really about one moment or one set of fans. It was about a pattern. NASCAR has always needed personalities who create friction, who split the crowd, who make the sport impossible to ignore. Dale Earnhardt Sr. did it. Tony Stewart did it. Kyle Busch did it. The sport publicly complains about its difficult personalities while they are active, then quietly mourns them the hardest when they are gone. Stewart was not grieving softly. He was demanding that people ask themselves a harder question. Why does it take death to get to this? In Dover's Victory Lane, 6 days before he died, Kyle Busch was asked why race wins never get old for him. His answer was simple: because you never know when the last one is. He was right. And Tony Stewart is furious not because the tributes are wrong, but because they should have started a long time ago.